So this idea has been presented over at the winteriscoming.net website about how the Wheel of Time should have gotten the Rings of Power's huge budget, and that would have somehow magically made the show better. Um, I don't know that I necessarily agree with this, but there is some interesting thought process behind this concept. And this is a really good article, which we're going to be diving in today to talk about a little bit more about, kind of what has gone on behind both of the shows and what could make Wheel of Time better. I don't know that a bigger budget is necessarily going to solve all the issues, but there's some great conversations to be had around it. So we're going to dive in today. I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renvale, the bearded dwarven princess to some. If this is your first time tuning in, well, this is the part of the video where I say like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon because we do lots of fun stuff like this here. Not only are we covering The Wheel of Time, which is my favorite book series of all time, we're also covering The Rings of Power, we're covering House of the Dragon, we're covering Star Wars Andor, the upcoming Willow show, so much more. Plus, there's lots of RPGs and MMORPGs that happen on my channel. So if all of that sounds fun to you, make sure you follow along and support as well because that's what keeps this channel full time. All of these people allow me to do this for a living. So if you like what you see here today and you want me to keep going, just drop a super thanks down in the video or join as a member. Lots of cool stuff happens for members here. More at the end on other ways you can support. But in the meantime, let's dive into the thought that, more money could have solved the problems with Wheel of Time. I will say right out of the gate that I read the Hollywood Reporter piece that came out yesterday, and that article literally says that season one of The Rings of Power cost $700 million to produce. Think about that for a minute. That's what the article says. Hollywood Reporter, big interview with the showrunners for Rings of Power, and it says it cost $700 million to produce just season one. By comparison, Wheel of Time cost $80 million. Now, mentioned in this article somewhere down in here, it says here, while both these shows are among the most expensive that Amazon has ever created, they are not created equal. Season 1 of The Wheel of Time is made for reported $80 million. Meanwhile, the first season of The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, has been reported to have had a budget of nearly $500 million, including the money it cost to acquire the rights from the Tolkien estate. It is easily the most expensive TV show ever made. Now, the Hollywood Reporter article does not necessarily mention. Matter of fact, can I pull that up? Is this the one from yesterday? Yes, it is. So I'm going to just plug in. Now that the production has found its stride post-pandemic, new episodes will likely be produced considerably faster than the debut batch. Still, McKay notes they expect to work on season 2 for another couple of years. The first season famously racked up a bill for $700 million, including the rights. Aha! So make sure the distinction is noted for the purpose of this video that included the rights. So season 1 was the $250 million for the rights, and then a whole lot more, $450 million. $450 million is what it cost to produce season 1 of The Rings of Power, compared to $80 million for the Wheel of Time. That's a staggering amount of money. I'm sorry. My brain is literally trying to wrap my head around that number, and I can't. I'm a small fish. I've helped manage businesses that were worth a few $1,000,000, and I've seen payroll and overhead of up to around 10 million, but I've never, 80 million I can comprehend. Like, that's conceivable because you're talking about 80 million spread out over, say 8 episodes. So you've got about $10 million per episode. That is totally believable considering most shows these days, you're looking at a ballpark of $10 million per episode to produce. It could go up as high as $15 or $20 million, but $10 million an episode is a pretty good number to shoot for any sort of prestige television. But the idea of let me just I got to pull out a calculator for this because my brain can't do big math in the morning. I haven't had enough coffee. $450 million divided by, there was 8 episodes. That's $56 million per episode. Just production costs. That does not include the rights, because we stripped the rights out of that $700 million equation, so we're left with a $450 million production cost. That's $56 million per episode for Rings of Power, and yet, whatever. I am going to say, as we dive through the rest of this article, one thing I noticed about both of these shows, both the Rings of Power and Wheel of Time, is that one of my biggest complaints is that when you look at these shows compared to, say, Game of Thrones or what's airing right now, House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones looks very lived in. The sets are dirty. There's dust, there's mud, there's dirt, there's grime. The costumes are dirty and gritty. It's very lived in, as opposed to Rings of Power and Wheel of Time. Wheel of Time suffered from it worse. Rings of Power is slightly better. But the Wheel of Time show suffered from sets that looked as though they had been built yesterday. Everyone's clothing was completely spotlessly clean always. Everything looked like it was freshly constructed. There wasn't any aging to it. It looked like sets. And Rings of Power also suffered from that in some cases. Other cases, they did a decent job. But I mean, it definitely, I would say, the one thing that stands out between the two shows is that the VFX, the visual effects, which is the CGI for Rings of Power, was light years beyond what they had working for them in the Wheel of Time, especially the One Power, Sadan and Sadar. Like, it did not look like a high quality production with the way they chose to represent the One Power being used. And as I understand, for season 2, they're adding color coding to it so that we can have a better understanding of if someone's using, you know, fire versus air or so on and so forth. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if they have more money to play with for um, season 2. What I will say is that looking at, say, Rings of Power for season 1, if they had $450 million, I need to know where that money went, because it wasn't for the actors, because all the actors they had are new faces. Like, they're not really established actors, so we didn't have anybody who needed a big paycheck. Rings of Power, you have a couple of bigger name actors, but you're still not dealing with people who need $5 million an episode. Looking at, say, The Witcher, which is largely carried on the back of Henry Cavill, he's getting paid a decent amount of money. I don't remember what it is for season 3. I remember season 1 was like $300,000 per episode, and then I think it went up to one something like around $1 million per for season 2. But he started off like $300,000 an episode for season 1, which is a good paycheck. It's not like an obscene amount of money like Tom Cruise would get paid to do something. But what I'm getting at is, in neither one of these shows' cases was the money ate up by salaries for the main actors. So the money had to have gone towards production costs, which is visual effects, sets, and costuming at this point, and music composition. But in any case, um, I think that if you watch The Wheel of Time, it very much feels like an $80 million production. You've got about $10 million per episode, so it feels kind of like a middle of the run, middle of the ground, run of the mill production. Rings of Power, it looked overly polished and ridiculously high definition in some areas, which didn't necessarily work in its favor, but that's still a mind-boggling amount of money. Um, I don't want to get into this part of the article. You guys can read through this at your leisure, where they're talking about, the quality of the writing between the two shows. They're not wrong. What I will say is that when you look at the difference, and they do make this distinction in the article, one of the reasons why a bigger budget could have been better for Wheel of Time, and hopefully they give it a bigger budget moving in later into the show, is that when you look at the Rings of Power, they're dealing with they only have the rights to a tiny bit of content, which is the appendices of the Lord of the Rings, and whatever's mentioned in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings in terms of the Second Age. That's what they have to work with, which is this tiny sliver of content, and they have to try to stretch that out because that was their decision to do that. So it is what it is. So they don't have a lot to pull from. There are a lot of characters mentioned and a lot of events mentioned, but the details around those characters and the details around those events are in other books that they don't have the rights to. That is not the case with The Wheel of Time, where they actually have 14 novels, massive Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson style novels that are like 750 pages per. You've got these massive tomes, 14 of them, which detail in the down to the last absolute minutia all of the inner workings and monologuing and dialoguing of every single character in the show. So they have a ton of foundation material that they can pull from for the adaptation. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything when the showrunner has been willing to just throw everything out and say, well, I'm going to rewrite characters like Perrin, and I'm going to give him a wife that we're going to kill off, and I'm going to make him the blacksmith even though he wasn't, and I'm going to completely change Matt's character and throw him out the gate, and all of these other things. It doesn't actually help. But the point is, we have a ton of source material, and had they been given a bigger budget, could they have made Wheel of Time better? I would argue that a bigger budget isn't going to solve the problems that you have with the showrunner who claims he's a fan, but then is willing to completely throw everything out the window. Um, if you're a true fan of the books, you're not willing to do that. You accept that yes, you do have to adapt to some things, but you don't just butcher the characters. Like you need to get them close to what they're represented, how they're represented on page. But that's another topic for another time. There is a video coming down the pipeline about how the showrunners of these shows can't actually be fans because they're willing to just throw all these things out the window. Anyway, um, you this idea that the Wheel of Time has a lot more source material to pull from is also very true. Um, they also say there's a clear case here that The Wheel of Time improved as a production over the course of its first season to a point. It says by episode 6, the show was so strong that it had moved me to tears multiple times. It did not move me to tears. And it felt like it was really hitting its stride. Then the pandemic happened, which threw a wrench into the final 2 episodes. Main cast member Barney Harris left for undisclosed reasons in the middle of production, and pretty much all the climatic action set pieces had to be reworked due to health concerns. More than 3 years after the COVID-19 pandemic began, it's hard to think of a show in the fantasy or sci-fi space that was screwed over quite as badly as The Wheel of Time. I'm not going to disagree with that. As opposed to, I do think that I was very, I was even watching it with Chris, who's never read the books, and Wheel of Time was getting slightly better with each episode. I wasn't agreeing with a lot of the decisions they had made, but they got to the gates, and then all of a sudden Matt just gets left behind, and I went, whoa, 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 you can't, no, 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 what? And then I found out, because I wasn't paying attention to all the production delays and everything else, um, I found out that he had left due to undisclosed reasons, and I was like, oh, so that's why they don't have him for the last 2 episodes, because he just was like, yeah, fuck this, I'm out, I don't want to do this anymore. And it was like, you just left the production in a lurch. Like, that sucks. I don't know the reasons. I don't want to speculate on the reasons. I can understand COVID related, health related. You know, we've been delayed 3 times. I need a paycheck. I got to go get other work, guys. And you can't keep me locked down in a contract if and you're not paying me to be waiting. Like, I get that. Like, if that was the case, I may have walked too. If my family needs food, I'm gonna go get work over here. And sorry, I have a contract with you guys, but you can't. No. Mm-mm. Anyway, who knows what the reasons was, but it definitely felt like the show was getting better over time, and then it just pulled the rug out from under us the last 2 episodes. Now, Rings of Power, on the other hand, I felt like it got progressively worse as the show went on, to the point where if you watch my reviews, my lore-based reviews, I was giving the show like 4s and 5s for the first few episodes, because they were, what they were doing with the lore. And then as we hit like the midway point, I started getting less and less and less. And by the time I got to the season finale, I gave it a 0 out of 10. The season finale for Rings of Power got a 0 out of 10 from me because it just wasn't. It wasn't. Cringe. Anyway, I don't know that you can fix something just by throwing more money at it. I don't disagree that the Wheel of Time should have gotten a bigger budget. Should it have gotten $450 million? Honestly, I don't think you need $450 million to tell a good story. What was Game of Thrones budget? Game of Thrones first season average, and assuming this is correct by Screen Rant, it says their budget for season 1 was approximately $6 million per episode, compared to the $10 million per episode that they spent for Wheel of Time. And I would argue that season 1 of Game of Thrones, and granted that was 10 years, whatever it was before, so inflation and cost of living, all those things have gone up, but not by that much. But if you look at one of the things that Game of Thrones did right, its early seasons didn't have a lot of CGI. It was very low magic, and they didn't get into the visuals until the later seasons of Game of Thrones. So the first seasons focused on 2 things: high quality acting and really good scripts, really good writing, really good scripts, and focused on character development so that we wanted to live with these characters. We were rooting for these characters. We believed these characters. It was focused on character acting, not on visual effects. All right, not on sweeping visuals, although those did exist to a degree. It was mostly focused on just really tight storytelling, which is something they had done very well with, like The Sopranos and Rome and so on and so forth over the years, and won a lot of awards for their shows because of the quality of the writing and the quality of the acting. So I would consider HBO to be like prestige television in that regards, and they did it with a much lesser budget than the Wheel of Time had, and I feel like they did a lot more with a lot less. So you don't need more money necessarily to be better. You just need good showrunners who are good writers, and actors who are competent. Food for thought. Anyway, if you liked what you heard here today, hopefully you will like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Hopefully I've earned your sub, and hopefully you want to support this channel because everything I do based on the support of these amazing people who keep me full time so that I don't have to go out and get a job flipping burgers at McDonald's or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I've been there, done that, but I much prefer doing this for a living. So if you can support, throw a few bucks my way. Do a super thanks on uploaded videos, do a super chat or sticker on premieres like this. You can also join as a member of the Adventurers Guild. There's a few options down below. And of course, we also have a Patreon page where my wife and my brother and I are building the fantastical world of the Weave and the Void. And beyond that, there's also live streams that happen throughout the week. So hopefully we'll see you there as well. Until next time, stay tuned because I got a lot more Rings of Power, House of the Dragon, Wheel of Time, Star Wars, and more coming to this channel. So, until next time, everybody. Peace.